So welcome everyone. My name is Beth Ann Gerstein and I'm the Executive Director of AMOCA, and I'd like to introduce the star of today's program is Nick Vest, and I'll hand it over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for watching. We also have Elizabeth Wild, who is an artist and runs an art project space called MenLo Garage here in LA, and Amy Santoferraro, who is an all-over educator and artist and was my graduate school professor and undergraduate school friend.
Great. So maybe you can tell us why we're here today and how did this exhibition come about?
Yeah. We're here because you gave me space, which was maybe a leap of faith, and I'm very grateful for that. For me, making an exhibition is really different than making individual pieces of work, and it's a way that I prefer to work, and I was able to do that. I've been here working for 9 months as a long-term resident at AMOCA, so this is my 9 months of work. The show is titled Works Made in Residence, which I think is my best title ever. I love titling shows, and I love a title that people will understand to be super duper simple and actually is something else.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the residency program for you?
Yeah. For me, I came here from Jingdezhen, China, where I live normally, 9 months ago. And it's been a lot of sitting in my studio and looking. This is the first time I've worked in a public space in a very long time, which is really great and also sometimes different. Yeah, the residency has been wonderful. There's been great artists. Amy was here when I first got here. Kim Tucker, Brianna Farina, and Chris Suarez. It's been nice to have company and make work in a new place and then get to put it all together.
I'm curious, talking about thinking through an exhibition instead of an individual piece. I do the same thing. And a friend recently said, like, I haven't seen a lot from you. I'm like, I haven't had any shows. And also the way you part things out at the front, we see a list that after this show, things just become parts. And I also know you have major beef with the word installation. Yeah, how do you pace yourself? Or how do you know what's gonna make the final reveal? And is there one moment that is the thing that, like, you're like, okay, now I've got it? Or is it working backwards?
Yeah, pacing, I realized putting up the show that I probably made a mistake in the pacing, and I'll remember that next time. I have a way of working that is very much make parts and collect them and then make things out of them, which is why I like building an exhibition, right? Because the exhibition becomes the thing, then you get to just use all the objects to make that larger thing. I'm just going to use the word thing a lot. But it's also, I think, difficult sometimes. So we also put up this show in 4 days. Thank you to Beth and thank you to Pam, who's our videographer. With their help, it was possible. Not too stressful.
10 minutes.
But yeah, if this wasn't an exhibition, if this were just work that I had finished and sent off, there are a lot of pieces in here that I would never send to someone.
Right.
Because they're just too minor or too, they can't hold their own. But there was something I really wanted to do with the exhibition, which is all this titling, which is not how I normally title work. This is your first experience.
It's almost like a stream of consciousness is the titles, is
Yeah.
how I felt when I viewed the exhibition.
You get very interested in that because it's kind of like the conversations of things that are happening while work's being made. Like that's what's happened over the last 9 months, all this kind of the background drama, a lot of it has been quite disturbing actually. And then I start to wonder how certain objects relate to that dialogue. And some of the things I make my own strange connections for, and I don't know how much of it is your intention with some of the books and some of the heavy content that's in some of those, and how they relate to some of the text pieces. You know, is that a free form, or do you like work really hard at trying to suck all of those things in for connections?
Yeah, I mean, I love the things, right? Because the things do that, especially books. So the books are here because everything that's not something I made is going into one of these suitcases and going back to Jingdezhen with me. So the books are just something that I buy when I'm in America, and some things that I've been moving to China 2 suitcases at a time for 7 years. And I don't have much left in this country, but there's still some books. But they're really meaningful objects, and people have relationships to them, and even just a title if you have no relationship to it. But sometimes there is some connection that I'm trying to make, but more often I'm relying on loaded objects and images to make those connections. And the titles, the more honest answer is they have very little to do with the exact object next to them. You can get airy and say, oh, they have everything to do because that's what I was thinking about while I was making that. That's a little loose for me.
I just kind of wonder if some of the objects are fighting with the content, or whether they're complacent with it, or maybe all those things happen across all those objects.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think things have become more flexible for you since living in China for 7 years and returning to the States? And there's like now this kind of borrowed Americana. Like I'm thinking specifically about the things from your youth, or like the cat's meow, like very Midwestern things that maybe I only know in this group, right? And now to you, they're like almost slightly foreign. Is that a stretch, or do you have more authorship now than ever to work with the found objects of your place? Now that you're displaced.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think it's very different for me to be bringing in the personal objects when the show is slanted in a way, right? The show has a set of feelings. So then when I bring in things like a cast that I was wearing when I was young, the broken foot becomes like this bigger metaphor for things, where I've really been trying to use that bowling pin and that cast for 10 years. I think I had them with me in Kansas because I love the way those two things sit together, and they're both signed in the same way, and they just, and I don't run away from that, but I'm also not a person who then writes about the piece exactly what it means clearly. But yeah, things are different now that I'm abroad. And I've been thinking a lot about what this work would mean if I took it to China and showed it, and I don't think it would make any sense.
It wouldn't translate the same way.
No, and I wouldn't title the same way, but it would be, it's kind of set in place for me now.
I just kind of wonder some of the combinations too. Like I'm looking at cardboard with ceramics with handmade things that are very labored, or you put your time and energy into it, and then you've got these boxes that are disposable, and it does kind of feel like this traveler or transient in regards to value too, like how we value things and things that we touch during our lifetime. I don't know.
So maybe you can also respond along that line of, I know you had a whole thought process around, you put prices on everything, so can you maybe share your pricing structure?
My pricing structure.
Or lack thereof.
Gives me this big smile. Oh, there's a structure.
I know there is.
Did you make a spreadsheet?
No, I did it without. I did it by hand. The prices on the work are, I have a Chinese pricing structure, or a pricing structure that I use for my work in China that's not super rigid, but I know about what this piece and this piece and this piece cost. So I used those prices, but I multiplied them by the amount more that 1 milliliter of Coca-Cola costs here than it does in China. Because value is just something that's so perplexing to me. And it's not it's not about cost. It is, like, value has cost factored in, but it's so much about willingness to pay. And I've just been really stuck on that a lot. And I thought, I can't just make my prices the same. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense. I should have done that. If I were concerned about selling the work, I should have done that. And I think there's a lot of things, like the cardboard, I think there's a lot of things that I'm fine with kind of undercutting the meticulous objects, or the objects that are like good art objects in ceramics, or better art objects in ceramics. I think they're kind of undercut by the titles. I think I'm hurting my own work a lot, but it's fine because the work is the exhibition.
Well, does it change the way you think? I mean, we walk through ceramic education with time as a quantity for quality, right?
Yeah.
So does it change your relationship to your labor in regards to the assemblage, right? Like, your value system is up for discussion in each piece, right? It's not weighted by the amount of material you manipulated,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's really about, I don't know, not just time, because a fast thing can be the best thing, but yeah, there's some kind of subjective quality measure. But the labor idea, I wrote in the main writing for the show, and I don't have a lot of interest in subsidizing my own practice with my labor anymore. And part of that is about value, but a lot of it is just about, I don't think me making something by hand is the best way to make a lot of the things that I want to make anymore. My favorite works in the show are stacks of cardboard boxes and packages and things that I didn't make. I've told a lot of people recently I want to make art with money and not clay anymore. Partially because I'm just not that good of a laborer, and Jingdezhen taught me that.
That's why I'm like, you've
Yeah.
been living amongst
Massively
craftsmen.
skilled laborers who have a lower value on their time than a studio artist does.
And for those that have,
that's right.
I'm sorry, so you've shared about, how things are made in Jingdezhen. So for those who haven't been or don't understand, maybe you can share that, because I think it makes your process make sense.
Yeah, Jingdezhen colors, I think, a lot of the way I think about things anymore. Jingdezhen is a place where ceramic industry has existed for more than 1,000 years in some capacity, and has existed in a lot of different levels and still does. And there is high production factory industry, but there's also single labor shops that will just make molds or just Qionghua paint, China paint. There's some pieces, my last two pieces that I made in Jingdezhen are in the show also. And that really, I was never a person who was in love with sticking my hands in the clay, maybe when I was first found it, but for me it was always about the final product more than the making, which I think is uncommon in ceramics. And I love a lot of artists that feel the opposite way. It's just not the way that I feel. And Jingdezhen made that really clear to me, that I was much happier to pay someone who could do it better than do it myself worse.
I don't know, all of that relationship is very problematic for artists.
How's that?
Well, because because the hand is an essential element in artwork typically, or has been traditionally. And I think that once you're hiring people, then you lose something, or the work changes. Now, I think that that's okay in some cases and for some pieces, but I don't necessarily think that's a safe way for an artist to practice, because then you become that person who has studio assistants making your work for you, and they become the people in these factories that are churning out pieces and being underpaid. And I think that it's a sick place to be. And because I think that, that frustration that you have, that irritation with your imperfection is in some level of strength. It's supposed to inform and make this work that its imperfection may be its true beauty. Like it may be the thing that makes it rise above a piece of factory pottery.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
It is,
So-
I mean, the like empirical curiosity result, right? Like, oops, this didn't work, but there's something
But
else,
look what
right?
happened.
Yeah, but
That part
you
does go
lose that. And then, yeah, you put yourself in that dangerous position of devaluing somebody else's labor, you know? I don't know. But there are places, and sometimes, okay, we live in a really weird world where that is an important conversation. The fact that there's so much production being made. You know, we live in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah.
So there's no way out of that. And I think there are brilliant works that are made talking about that. But I don't know that it's a good place for an artist to live, you know. No,
I feel like, I mean, this is the conversation always, right? And you said at first, what do you lose? And my first thought was your time. You lose your time. And I think as you get older, this is something that's been happening to me. Like, time is just different. And so to pay somebody out or to claim something for 25 cents instead of make it myself, that exchange, I'm totally on board. But I do think, having used so many found objects in my own work, well, and I also just know clay a little bit more too, right? It's like you get to a point where you're like, but they can do it better and the price is fair. And it's just a contribution to this bigger thing. It could just be a rationalization that
and that's like a really weird thing because even if you're casting something, you can go to a thrift store and pick up like 50 maybe ceramic hands in a thrift store, you know, and then you're like, well, why should I spend my time there doing that?
I mean, we have styrofoam and plastic. These things are obsolete now, you know? It's hard.
Yeah.
It's, and so I am always curious about super specific combinations and decisions when somebody has the ability to like make it all, right?
Yeah, and decisions is a really big word for me. Like I more and more think art making is decision making, and that maybe is part of that transition away from like the hand. But I also when I talk about making things with money, I don't see myself ever as a person with a lot of studio assistants where they're just doing my handwork. I'm talking about going out into the world and buying a thing that doesn't need to be a clay thing. Or in Jingdezhen, you don't hire one person to make your piece. You hire a mold maker, and then you hire a slip caster, and then you hire a glazer, which I probably never would. I'm always going to glaze the thing. Probably not
But you
always.
are making decisions of where that begins and ends.
Exactly, and there's a communication with each of those people, and there's decisions because, like I said, when I make parts and then combine them, there's that decision at the end and display.
And deciding
But there's
when you
still a lot
want
of
the
dangers
ready-made versus your own hand.
That, you know, like the jewelry industry or whatever, that's like a traditional designer's role. And I actually, my degree is through a glass department, which is very complementary to ceramics. And that's been a long history as well. You know, the Italians have forever had somebody would come in and have these great blowers make this thing because it probably takes, 30 years to become an exquisite goblet.
To become a maestro.
Yeah, to hone that craft. And the same thing kind of happened to them. They kind of were relegated to craftsmen, and somebody else comes in and they designed it for them, although some of them were totally capable of designing their own, which is what's happened with the craft movement. And then you see Pilchuck where you've got, we know how to make these great goblets. We don't need to have these other people come in and tell us what to make anymore. We can sell our own work. So there's, it's tricky.
That might be how I'm drawing the line between that studio practice with studio assistants, because like my mold maker doesn't want to be an artist. he wants to make molds, and it's his skill, and he picked it up. I think hiring a young artist who needed a job to then make my work would be a very different thing. and would, I think, lead down that road.
But maybe you're right there. Well, how else do they learn the skills if they can't get hired to make money? So then they don't make it, you know. So, you know, it is a problematic thing that's happening right now, kind of, in art making.
So this past weekend, we had someone come in and see the exhibition, and their response was that you were anti-American.
Oh.
And I thought, I'd like to hear your response. I know you and I've talked about it, but I'd like to hear your response on what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really kind of cheap and easy answer that would say, like, I'm not anti-American. I believe we should be better because we have great potential.
But the real answer is...
That's a little soft. I'm not anti-American.
Critical, maybe.
I'm critical, and I'm critical here because it's my country, right? Mm-hmm. I have a very odd relationship with China where I tend to be defending China a lot and then saying China is not perfect, there are things, and then just trying to say also America is not perfect, there are things. But we have a 250-year head start and the largest economy in the world and a large population. But no, I'm not anti-America. I want it to be better because I want myself to be better. I want everything to be better. And I tried really hard not to state these titles in a way to like tell people what to believe. I tried to make it clear that like this is what I think. You can think what you want.
They're also rooted in fact, right?
Mostly. Some are. I mean, the ones that need to be rooted in fact are rooted in fact. I did research where there's numbers, those are fair researched numbers. But listen to more podcasts. This is an opinion.
I mean, you're rocking it pretty hard.
Yeah, rest podcasts.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the similar relationship to the objects of America. Our terrible ideas are also up for discussion now that you've observed. You're not wholeheartedly in it. You're kind of outside observation, but now you're back in it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think living in, it doesn't have to be another country, just another cultural area is the best thing any person can do for themselves, because you realize what was just default and what is meaningful, right? And impactful defaults that are just arbitrary, I think, are really damning. And it's easy to see those when you go to another place and they have a different set of impactful defaults, but they're different. And you get to say like, oh, that's really weird. Why do you guys do that? And then eventually you learn to come back to America and say, oh, that's really weird. Why do you guys do that? So yeah, I mean, it's not pleasant conversations maybe, but they need to be had.
It'll also be interesting. We should do this talk again in a year after you've been home for a year to see how coming to America as an adult maybe changed your vision when you get back to China.
Yeah, this is, I've said it a few times, this is my first time working professionally here. And the way that I work is to sit and think and stare at things. And so doing that here is a lot of taking it in, which has been a lot.
Can you talk about the video a little bit?
Yeah. I think the video is still a work in progress. I also think the video is maybe one of the only things that kind of adheres to my application to the residency and what I said I wanted to talk about. What I was really interested in was not the relationship between the US and China as countries, but the relationship that Americans have with China that they don't know that they have.
Such as?
So one of the first pieces in the show is just a photo, my wedding photo for my marriage license. My wife is Chinese, you can't see the photo. And I was married in China, and her visa was denied. She applied for a tourist visa. She was supposed to be here now, and it was denied. And every time I tell someone that, they say, "Oh, it's amazing! It's so horrible that China would do that." And that's not how visas work. Visas are granted by the country you're visiting. And I think if I told people, or if people knew my wife was from Sweden and her visa was denied, they would say like, "Oh, America denied your visa. That's really sad." But there's this really strong bias, and that's not to say there aren't, things that are worth being biased against happening, but we do plenty of those too. And it's just I wanted to make work that was about propaganda and its effects and the way that I see the U.S.-China relationship being its most problematic in what it teaches Americans to think about China. And that's what the video gets at. So there's an actor who I hired to recreate Pierre Escargot's Everyday French, which is a clip from All That, which was a kids' comedy variety show in the 90s. And he's recreating that, in which Kenan Thompson played a character who just said gibberish that sounded like French and then translated it to a nonsense American sentence. And Colby, who's the actor, Colby Gross, he's not saying gibberish. There are quotes, and I taught him the Chinese. I walked through him phonetically, but I did not try to get him to get it perfect. I tried to get him to get it to the intelligible level, because there's all of this, so that it didn't feel mocking in any way, right? There was one time where he kind of slipped into an accent, and we had to pause and say, "Hey, no accents," and he was like, "Thank you." But I wanted to make a metaphor for how much news about China is presented as, facts from the ground, where it's not that. But we don't have any reference, right? An American doesn't have any reference to kind of navigate those things and decide what they believe. And when the only thing two sides of the political spectrum can agree on is that China is the bad thing, it seems really easy to say, like, every bad thing you hear must be true, and they aren't all.
And what about the inclusion? You have a whole segment on a football game.
Yes. So it's the same idea. It's a metaphor for the same thing. Thank you. There is a football game between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Tennessee Titans. The Titans, for some reason, are my favorite team from Pennsylvania.
For some reason.
I don't know why. Kind of know why. Not important. And the Chargers are obviously the local team. But for a long time, I've liked to use sports in my work because it's something that art people don't like, right? So the same way, and that's not totally true, but it's always easy to kind of pull one over because you're just using the subject matter that people aren't super interested in general. So I filmed this game, and it's silenced, and I've altered the score. There's a play in the first quarter where my team scored, but it was called back because they did something illegal. But I cut out the callback, so they just score and it moves on to the next play, and then they end up winning. But the altered scores that I put in are not the best photoshopping. Sometimes you can see through them. And if you really watch the end of the game, you would see the other team driving down to score 3 points when they need 7 and celebrating, and you would have no idea. But nobody really watches the game, right? So it's the same thing. If you really did your research on China, you would be able to see, like, oh, these things are problematic, and I should think that they're problematic. These things are maybe just normal, right? I hear the phrase, China is trying to combat our economic dominance. And it's like, so they're trying to prosper? Like, dominance? We want dominance? That's a good word? And I think if you said that about Sweden, just to continue the metaphor, somebody would say, like, wait, what? And, like, yes, China has the population and size to be an economic power, and that's something the government should know about and understand its effects. But for the people to think, like, oh, they're trying to dominate us economically. And really, I tell everyone this, Chinese citizens overwhelmingly have a positive opinion on foreigners and Americans specifically. Amy came to our residency in China showed me that people love Americans, people love foreigner. It doesn't pervade to the population the way that it does here.
So along the game line, sorry.
No.
So along the game line, in many of the works, you have video games or little children's games with, I think it's pigs.
Board games.
Yeah, board games.
So, yes.
Board games.
Yeah. So again, these are just the things that are going into my suitcase, but also again, they give me a chance to play and make decisions. So the video games I'm using as a way to talk about value, right? Because value in art, it's both real and not real. It is real. It is based on a market value, especially for an established artist. But it's not real in that it doesn't factor in a lot of cost and stuff like that. So I have standard price kind of plateaus, and I standardize them a little more to make this joke. But there are pieces with video games in them, and they're retro video games that have been in my grandma's house forever. And I added the price of the video games into the pieces of work. So there's kind of a standard price for works of a size and quality, and then if it has a video game in it, it might be that plus $70. Yeah. So it's kind of a way, right? These two pieces here are very, very similar. They're of a limited series, but they have two different games, and one is quite valuable and one is quite common. So that one is more than that one. And I use those two games in the video also. There's captures of playing this game with the soundtrack of this game superimposed, which again, like sports, right? Most people are not going to know that those two things aren't lining up.
Unless they played both of those games.
Unless they played,
Yes.
or even one to know that, like, hey, that's not right.
That's not right.
And they're old games. They would have had to play them a long time ago. And what was the other? It was video games
And then there was little.
board games. Yeah,
Yeah,
board
board
games
games.
are really just things that I buy here to take back with me. And I was kind of trying to challenge myself to get everything that's going in those suitcases, except for clothing, in here. But I didn't. There's some things I left out.
Boring stuff.
Yeah, I don't.
Toothpaste that
Yeah.
you like.
I don't. I think there's a way of making art that's really great, and a lot of people really excel at that is like making these rules and systems and following them. But for me, I like to break my own rules. So there's like a lot of decisions that I make 2 times, and then I make something different the 3rd time. Like this isn't actually all my recycling. There's even still some in my apartment that I just like didn't bring in. Like I don't care. It doesn't need to be every piece of recycling. It just needs to be the right mass. And once it's there, it's okay.
Was there anything else that we didn't touch on in the work that
Yeah.
either of you want to ask or you want to
Who
tell?
are you? Do you have questions for us?
You sounded like you had one, then I'll come after.
I was formulating it. It might be
Okay,
gone.
I
It
think
might
I
be
got one.
gone.
It might be gone.
I think
Post
I got
tense
mine.
secret.
It'll come.
The other things that are in here are art objects from other people, and that goes into that value conversation, or comes into I've talked about like economic status. I come from, the way I usually describe it is like poor but not completely impoverished, right? We had the gifts that we wanted, but I learned later in life it was because we also had 3 mortgages, things like that. But I think there's like a power in being the art buyer, right? You get to do what you want with the work. And I like to collect a little bit of art. So there's pieces by a Danish artist named Qionglai Ceramic Center, and there's a few pieces that I bought while I was here from other artists. And that's been something that I've done for a long time. I like, I kind of justify it by saying curation is an art form, but it's not really that either.
Well, but you do it kind of in the construction of your pieces too. This is where I was out. I got it back.
This was the question.
Ooh. So I'm thinking about the super glazed glue kind of chance, right? There's a lot of things that if you didn't know what you were doing ceramically, you wouldn't get that piece in the end, right? But you've also left it a little bit to chance, specifically the coils and the kind of controlled chaos, but you're okay with it. And in some cases, you've also like tweaked it up a little more by making the legs uneven, or and then, you know, right next to something as low tech as like, I want this ribbon here, I'm gonna blue tape it, and it's so temporary.
They're actually epoxy.
They're epoxy.
They're
I left the
epoxy
tape
and
on. Yeah,
Epoxy, then left with tape on.
yeah. The tape was the epoxy process, and I liked it.
Yeah, you are choosing different different moments for like care, I suppose, or intention, or sentiment, and yeah, the inclusion of other, like, has anybody come to you of their work in the show and is like, what are you doing? That's
Not
One-
here. I once glazed a Val Cushing cup to a tile when I was in undergrad.
oh, I remember this.
And I had a few, not Val, and I had not asked Val, but kind of pitched it to him because I was lucky enough to be able to go to the sale at his house because I worked for the museum. And I had told him through the museum director that I was thinking about doing this, and sure, sounds fun. But there were a few people who came to the defense of that object.
Defense that you shouldn't have glued it?
Yeah,
or
I shouldn't
You
have.
didn't-
Yeah, I shouldn't have.
You should have been more reverent about it.
Yeah, and I don't. You know, there's a way that I'm comfortable debasing my own work that I wouldn't do to another person's, although they might think that I did. But yeah, I mean, I treat them as, I wouldn't use an object that I didn't love,
Right.
So I love those things, and I purchased those things, and it's not about like making a show of like, look at what the collector can do to your work, let's step on it. It's about like, if I'm saying I'm a collector of my own work and I'm just jamming them together with found objects, then it would be strange to not use the art objects that I collect.
It doesn't feel like there's any hierarchy with materials, like
Right.
they're all part of this kind of moving arrangements, right? And I guess that comes into that question about what people do with objects once they own them, right? Or they have them in their house. Maybe people's sculptures are on top of moving boxes, and
Yeah.
and maybe they have all sorts of different lives. I mean, maybe a lot of this is about the life of the objects, the transition.
And maybe a little like authorship or owner,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
I have been trying to make a novel work about authorship since 2015, and I still haven't done it. This isn't that. Amy left some pieces in China, and I texted her one day probably. I was like, hey, can I take those? I think I have an idea about how I can make an artwork that actually says something new about authorship. And then I was wrong. I tried it. It didn't work.
All the pots that I had a master thrower through,
Yeah, exactly.
build on that.
Yeah, well, no, I figured if I was taking a finished but unfinished artwork that was made for a different intention and
Yeah.
changing it, it didn't say anything interesting that I thought.
Passing thought.
The other thing mostly it's a similarity that I've been thinking in myself. You don't feel like you have to take this idea as your own. But I recently have been thinking a lot about the way I use ceramics. Ceramics is forever, and right? Like
Yes.
forever. And I fear commitment a lot. And so it makes this sort of bridge, right? Where I'm like, whatever, this thing's forever, so nothing else matters. And it gives me a little bit of freedom, but it also makes it really solid. And in a way, it's sort of a mask, right? Like I'm masking sincerity or I'm masking intention. Do you resonate with that? Or am I in need of therapy?
Yes,
Masking-
and your answer.
Just that very last part lost me a little. Masking sincerity or masking intention through not through the permanence of ceramics, but through compiling the other objects.
Yeah, by not giving it
Yeah.
the sole ownership, complete object.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think everything, so I think the two of us are both very compositional makers also. There's, I forget the book that's not actually about relational aesthetics, about the way that I want it to be. But yeah. Yeah, there is definitely something, like presenting this big of a sculpture as a master work is, I don't know, difficult, right? Like, but putting it on top of a cardboard box next to 3 other things and saying, like, this is the sculpture, is maybe a cop-out, right? Maybe that's masking, or not masking, but maybe that's hiding a little bit from having a thing be, like, legible, or not legible, but specifically legible.
Yeah, or completely yours, or completely static, right? Like, there's still a lot of stuff that feels like it could reassemble into another thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a fear of commitment.
Yeah.
Sorry if I passed it on to you.
I don't think I have fear of commitment.
Yeah.
But I definitely, I don't tend to believe in, like, perfection, maybe, which is a similar thing, right? If an object is just by itself, it needs to be kind of perfect, but if it's with other things, it gets to build relationship there. I mean, there are some pieces by themselves. This is my favorite piece in the show, and it gets to be by itself. I think there are kind of 5 main pieces, and none of the other ones get to be by themselves, but that one does. But it definitely feels better to arrange them and say, like, this can come apart, and you can have the parts for free after the show if you want them.
Yeah. Because they're all in concert together, right? And yeah, the sort of stake on one of them feels arbitrary.
Yeah, there was, I mean, a funny example maybe is, I asked Beth if she wanted to pick out a piece for the museum, and she chose a piece over here. Oh, I really like those books. Can I interest you in this better piece?
Still got to read those.
Yeah, right. That's pretty much his answer. Yeah.
Yeah, which, like, I really should be like, oh yes, whatever. Because that thing is coming apart in my mind, and I'm taking those books back, right? Because
it was not part of the offer that I could take anything that didn't have books.
Well, you could take anything if you want to, but we had a discussion, and we found another discussion. Oh, I thought it was a discussion.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Too fun.
Yeah, because those books have value, and not monetary value, but, like, they're things, and they can perform the way they're supposed to perform as things if I take them off that little rack and take it home.
So how do you feel about the time, the 9 months that you were here, how your work came out, transitioned, whatever word fits, given that you were sort of removed from your regular life?
I feel really good about it. I'm really satisfied with the work. 9 months felt like a short eternity in the beginning, because the way I work, like, I make fast and then sit for a long time, and I make fast and I sit for a long time. But I think the work is much better for having that much time, because it's that much more sitting, and it's better for having been able to know 6 months ago that this was the space. So I knew how much work I needed, and I didn't overproduce. And you might say I overproduced a little, but a lot of these things I didn't expect to be in here. Yeah, and it's been good to come back and just work, just me and clay. It feels like kind of a farewell tour at the moment. Like, I don't think I'm gonna make anything for a while when I get back home, because I need to think about it a lot. But I had no choice but to make it all myself here, and buy books and stuff. But but yeah, I think it was good for me. It might end up being a kind of kick out the door, but kicks out the door are good.
Get out. You've done it then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any parting words?
I mean, he just said
I
it.
think he just
Kicked
said
out the
it. Kicked out the door. Well,
Yeah.
thank you all for participating. This was great fun and really enjoyed watching how this rolled out. And
I'll say my thank yous too. Thank you to the museum and to Beth Ann and to all the staff of the museum. Thank you, Pam. Thank you to Dave Armstrong. Thank you to Laguna Clay for supplying the materials, and the Wingate Foundation for supplying the funding for the residency. Am I forgetting anyone?
Nathan.
Oh, of course, Nathan, Tim, Decker, all the studio staff has been really amazing. The museum staff has been amazing. It's been a really, really great place to work, and I'm really grateful for it.
Feelings mutual. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for coming today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.